A woman traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger and found a dying outlaw instead. What happened next in that snowbound cabin would rewrite everything she thought she knew about survival, trust, and who she really was. If you're ready for a story of betrayal, blood, and redemption in the untamed West, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of a saloon that looked like it had been built by men who'd given up halfway through. Red Hollow wasn't a town so much as a collection of wooden structures huddled together against the wind, as if even the buildings knew they didn't belong here. Eleanor Hale stepped down onto frozen mud, her traveling dress already filthy from 3 days of dust and jarring roads, and felt the weight of 2,000 miles settle onto her shoulders like a yoke. She was 24 years old. She had 73 cents in her reticule, and the man she'd come here to marry was nowhere to be seen. "You sure this is the place, miss?" The driver didn't look at her when he spoke, just started unloading her trunk with the kind of efficiency that said he wanted to be gone before sundown. "I'm sure." Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she felt. She pulled the letter from her coat pocket, though she'd memorized it weeks ago. Red Hollow, November 15th. I'll be waiting. James Farrow. Today was November 16th. The driver dumped her trunk in the mud and climbed back onto his seat without another word. Eleanor watched the stagecoach disappear down the rutted road, taking with it her last link to civilization, to Boston, to everything she'd known. The wind picked up, sharp enough to sting, and she pulled her coat tighter. The saloon doors swung open and a man stumbled out, already drunk though it couldn't have been past 2 in the afternoon. He looked at Eleanor the way a man might look at a stray dog. Mild interest mixed with the certainty that she was someone else's problem. "Excuse me." Eleanor stepped forward, trying to keep her voice level. "I'm looking for James Farrow." The drunk squinted at her. "Farrow?"
"Yes. He wrote to me. He works a claim up in the mountains. He was supposed to meet me here yesterday." The man's laugh was more of a bark. "Farrow ain't meeting nobody, lady." Something cold twisted in Eleanor's stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he cleared out 3 weeks ago. Owed money all over town. Owed the assayer. Owed the livery. Hell, he owed my brother $15 for a mule that died on him." The man spat into the mud. Smart bastard knew when to run. The world tilted slightly. Eleanor put a hand on her trunk to steady herself. "That's not possible. He wrote to me. He sent for me." "Yeah, well, Farrow was real good at telling folks what they wanted to hear." The drunk gestured vaguely toward the mountains. "He had a cabin up there, past the northern ridge. Probably empty now unless someone else took it over. You might find some of his things if you're dumb enough to go looking." He shambled off before Eleanor could respond, leaving her standing in the street with her trunk and the ruins of every plan she'd made. She'd sold everything. Her mother's silver, the furniture, the little row house in Boston that had been in her family for 30 years. She'd packed 2 bags, burned her bridges, and bought a ticket west because James Farrow's letters had promised her something she desperately needed: a fresh start, a partnership, a life that didn't involve choosing between factory work and a marriage to Thomas Wickham, her landlord's son, who had soft hands and dead eyes. Farrow's letters had been careful, respectful. He'd written about his claim, about the cabin he was building, about wanting a wife who could read and keep accounts and wasn't afraid of hard work. He'd sent a daguerreotype of himself, a lean, serious man with dark hair and eyes that looked honest. Eleanor had written back, and within 3 months they'd agreed. She would come west. They would marry. They would build something together. She'd believed every word. Now she stood in a frontier town that looked like it was rotting from the inside out, with no money, no husband, and no way home. The cold was getting worse. Eleanor could see her breath now, white clouds that vanished as soon as they formed. Around her, Red Hollow was already starting to shut down for the night. Windows glowed with lamplight. The saloon doors swung open and shut, releasing bursts of noise and warmth that made the street feel even colder by comparison. She needed to think. She needed a plan. But first she needed shelter. The boarding house wanted $2 a week, payable in advance. Eleanor tried 3 others before she accepted what she already knew. 73 cents wouldn't buy her a roof for even one night. The woman at the last house,
A tired-looking widow with flour on her hands took pity enough to be honest. "There's nothing here for you, dear. If you've got people back east, you'd better wire them for money and go home." Eleanor didn't have people back east. She had an aunt in Philadelphia who'd made it clear that Eleanor's presence would be a burden, and a cousin who'd stopped answering letters 2 years ago. Going back meant admitting failure to an entire city that already thought she'd made a fool's choice. "What about work?" Eleanor asked. "I can keep books. I can sew." The widow's expression softened into something like pity. "This time of year, everyone's hunkering down for winter. Nobody's hiring. Even the girls at the saloon are worried about getting let go once the miners head down from the high camps." Eleanor thanked her and walked back out into the cold. The street was nearly empty now. Somewhere a dog barked. A mule brayed from the livery. Eleanor stood next to her trunk and tried to calculate how long she could survive on 73 cents. 3 days? Maybe 4 if she didn't eat much. And then what? The mountains loomed to the north, dark shapes against a darkening sky. Up there, somewhere past the ridge, was James Farrow's cabin. Empty, according to the drunk, probably stripped bare by now, but possibly not. The idea formed slowly, born from desperation and the kind of reckless logic that only makes sense when you're out of options. If the cabin was empty, she could shelter there until spring. It would be rough, she had no illusions about that, but it was better than freezing in the street. And if there was anything left in the cabin, anything at all that she could sell, it might buy her enough time to figure out a real solution. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan she had. Eleanor bought supplies with her last money: matches, a small tin of lard, half a loaf of bread that was already going stale. The store owner looked at her like she was crazy when she asked about the trail to the northern ridge. "You can't be serious, lady. There's weather coming in. You can see it." He pointed toward the mountains, where the peaks had disappeared into thick gray clouds. "That's snow, bad snow. You go up there now. You won't come back down." "I don't have a choice," Eleanor said. The man studied her for a long moment, then sighed and pulled out a scrap of paper. He drew a rough map with a pencil stub. "Follow the creek north until you hit the split. Take the left fork, There's a trail, barely, that goes up through the pines. Farrow's cabin is about 2 miles past that, set back from the main path. You'll know it by the broken fence out front." He pushed the map across the counter. "This is a bad idea." "I know," Eleanor said. She left her trunk at the livery, taking only what she could carry in a canvas bag: her extra dress, the supplies, a wool blanket. The livery owner said she could store the trunk for a week before he'd sell it to cover the storage fee. Eleanor nodded. In a week, she'd either be settled in the cabin or dead from exposure. Either way, the trunk wouldn't matter. The trail started easy enough, a wide path worn smooth by miners heading to and from their claims. But within an hour, it had narrowed to something that barely deserved the name. The trees pressed in close, dark pines that blocked out what little light remained. Eleanor's boots slipped on frozen mud. Her breath came in short gasps that burned in her chest. She'd lived in Boston her entire life. The closest she'd come to wilderness was the public garden. This was something else entirely. The creek ran alongside the trail, black water sliding over rocks with a sound like whispers. When she reached the split, Eleanor paused to check the map, though it was almost too dark to read. Left fork, 2 miles. She kept walking. The snow started an hour later, light at first, just a few flakes that melted when they hit her coat, then heavier, then so thick she could barely see the trail in front of her. The wind picked up, howling through the trees with a sound that was almost alive, and Eleanor realized with a cold shock of certainty that the store owner had been right. She was going to die up here. Her feet were numb, her hands had stopped working properly. The canvas bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every step was a negotiation between her body, which wanted to stop, and her mind, which knew that stopping meant freezing. She almost missed the cabin entirely. It was set back from the trail just like the store owner had said, barely visible through the snow. No light in the windows. No smoke from the chimney. The fence was broken, leaning drunkenly into the drifts. Eleanor stumbled toward it, fell once in the snow, got up and kept going. The door was unlocked. She shoved it open and half fell inside, slamming it shut behind her. The darkness was absolute. She stood there, shaking so hard her teeth rattled, and fumbled for the matches. Her fingers were too stiff. She dropped the box twice before she managed to strike one. The small flame revealed a single room, a fireplace, a table, a chair, a cot against the far wall. And someone was in it. Eleanor's scream died in her throat. A man lay sprawled across the cot, half covered by a blanket that was black with what looked like dried blood. He wasn't moving. In the matchlight, his face was pale, almost gray, with dark stubble covering his jaw. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet, broad across the shoulders in a way that made the cot look like a child's bed. The match burned down to Eleanor's fingers, and she dropped it with a gasp. Darkness again. Her mind was racing. She could leave, right now. Walk back out into the storm and take her chances. But even as she thought it, she knew it was suicide. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. She wouldn't make it 100 yards. Eleanor struck another match, her hands shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. The man still hadn't moved. She crept closer, holding the match high. Now she could see the wounds, a gash across his ribs that had been crudely stitched with what looked like fishing line, another on his shoulder, a dark stain on his thigh that might have been a bullet wound. His shirt was in tatters, stiff with dried blood. He should have been dead. But when Eleanor leaned closer, she saw his chest rise, barely, just a shallow movement, and fall. He was alive. The match went out. Eleanor stood in the darkness, listening to the storm howl outside and the faint, ragged sound of the man's breathing. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This man was a stranger. He was hurt. He might be dangerous. She didn't know him, didn't know what had happened to him, didn't know anything except that he was in James Farrow's cabin, and that meant James Farrow had probably put him here. Or worse, had something to do with those wounds. Eleanor's mind spun through possibilities, each one darker than the last. But underneath the panic was a cold, practical voice that sounded like her mother. You can't go back out there. You'll die. This cabin is your only chance. And there was something else, something she didn't want to examine too closely. She'd spent 3 days on a stagecoach imagining what her new life would look like. She'd pictured herself as a partner, someone capable and strong, someone who didn't run from hard things. If she left this man to die, what did that make her? Eleanor struck another match and forced herself to look at him clearly. In the flickering light, she could see that he wasn't as old as she'd first thought. Maybe 30, maybe younger. His face was hard-lined, weather-beaten, with scars that suggested a life lived rough. But there was something about the set of his jaw, even unconscious, that spoke of stubbornness, a refusal to quit. She recognized that. She felt it in herself. The match died. Eleanor set down her bag and started feeling her way through the cabin. Her hands found firewood stacked near the hearth, kindling in a box. She built a fire the way her father had taught her 20 years ago, before he died and left her mother to raise her alone in a city that ate people like them for breakfast. The flames caught, grew, filled the cabin with light and warmth. In that light, Eleanor took stock of what she had. A dying man, a storm that showed no signs of stopping, and whatever supplies were left in this cabin. She started searching. A cast iron pot hung from a hook near the fireplace. A wooden crate held cornmeal, flour, dried beans, enough for maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. Another crate had medical supplies, bandages, a needle, and thread that looked cleaner than the fishing line currently holding the man together, a bottle of whiskey that was 3/4 empty. Someone had tried to save him, had stitched him up, left him supplies, and then had left. Eleanor touched the man's forehead and jerked her hand back. He was burning up. Infection. The wounds had gone septic. She'd watched her mother die of fever 6 years ago, had seen how it consumed a person from the inside out. If she did nothing, this man would be dead by morning. Eleanor sat back on her heels and let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of her situation. She was alone in a cabin with a dying stranger while a blizzard buried the mountains. She had no medical training, no experience, and no idea what she was doing. But she'd come 2,000 miles because she'd believed she could build a new life. She'd walked into the wilderness because she'd refused to give up. This man, whoever he was, deserved the same chance. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first thing she did was cut away what was left of his shirt. The fabric came apart like wet paper, revealing a chest crisscrossed with scars, old ones, white and faded, and the newer wounds that were red and swollen with infection. The worst was the gash across his ribs. The stitches were pulling apart, weeping yellow fluid. She heated water in the pot, tore her extra dress into strips for bandages, and poured whiskey over the needle and thread with shaking hands. The man didn't wake when she started cutting away the old stitches, which scared her more than if he'd screamed. She cleaned the wound as best she could, trying not to gag at the smell, and started stitching. Her hands were clumsy at first, the needle slipping, but she forced herself to focus. Small stitches. Even spacing. Like her mother had taught her for mending clothes, except this was skin and muscle, and if she did it wrong, he would die. She worked her way across the gash, her back aching from bending over the cot. Outside, the wind shrieked. Inside, the fire crackled and the man's breathing rasped in and out, in and out. When she finished the last stitch, Eleanor sat back and realized she was crying. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and moved on to the shoulder wound. Then the bullet hole in his thigh, which required digging out pieces of fabric that had been driven into the muscle. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the needle. She washed the blood off her hands and made herself eat some of the stale bread. The fire was dying down. She fed it more wood and then, because there was nothing else to do, she pulled the chair close to the cot and sat down to watch the man breathe. His fever wasn't breaking. If anything, it was getting worse. Eleanor soaked strips of cloth in cold water and laid them across his forehead, his chest. She talked to him, nonsense at first, just words to fill the silence, but then real things. About Boston, about the stagecoach ride, about James Farrow and his lies. "I don't even know your name," she said at one point, her voice hoarse from talking. "But I need you to live. Do you understand me? I need you to live because if you die, I'm alone up here and I don't know if I can do this by myself." The man didn't answer. Eleanor dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time the wind rattled the windows or a log shifted in the fire. At some point during the night, the man's breathing changed, got rougher, more labored. His skin was gray in the firelight. She was losing him. Eleanor grabbed the whiskey bottle and forced his mouth open, pouring a small amount between his lips. He choked, coughed, and his eyes flew open. They were blue, pale, startling blue, like ice. For a moment they stared at each other. Then his eyes rolled back and he was gone again, sinking back into unconsciousness. But he'd swallowed. His throat had worked. He was still fighting. Eleanor poured more water over the cloths and went back to work. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the gaps in the shutters. The storm had quieted to a steady snowfall. Eleanor's whole body ached. Her eyes felt full of sand. But the man's fever had finally broken sometime around 4 in the morning. He was cooler now, his breathing steadier. She'd kept him alive. Eleanor stood and stretched, her spine cracking. She needed to eat something, needed to check their supplies, needed to figure out how long she could survive in this cabin before she ran out of food or firewood or sanity. But first, she needed to know who this man was. She started searching the cabin more carefully. In a corner, she found a coat, heavy wool, torn and blood-stained. In the pockets, a knife, a small leather pouch containing gold dust, and a piece of paper folded into quarters. Eleanor unfolded it. It was a wanted poster. The face sketched on the paper was rough but recognizable, the same hard jaw, the same deep-set eyes. Above the sketch, Cole Barrett, wanted for assault. Reward, $200. Below that, in smaller print, known to frequent the Northern Territories, extremely dangerous. Do not approach. Eleanor's hands went numb. She looked at the man on the cot, this man she'd just spent 12 hours saving, and felt something like ice water flood her veins. Cole Barrett wasn't just dangerous. According to the poster, he'd killed 2 men in a claim dispute 3 years ago. He'd beaten another man half to death over a card game. He was exactly the kind of person every decent woman was warned to avoid, and Eleanor had just stitched him back together. She looked at the gold dust, then at the poster, then at Cole Barrett's unconscious face. Questions piled up in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. What had happened to him? Who had shot him? And most importantly, what would he do when he woke up and found her here? Eleanor folded the poster and put it back in the coat pocket. She fed the fire. She heated water for cornmeal mush and forced herself to eat even though her stomach was twisted into knots. Then she pulled the chair back to the cot and sat down to wait. Whatever came next, she would face it. She'd already made her choice when she'd picked up that needle. There was no point in second-guessing it now. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the trail, cutting off any escape route. Eleanor and Cole Barrett were trapped together. And somewhere out there, the people who'd put those bullets and knife wounds in him were still alive. The day passed in a haze of small tasks. Eleanor cleaned the cabin, organized the supplies, kept the fire going. She changed Cole's bandages and was relieved to see that the wounds looked better, less red, less swollen. Whatever infection had been raging through his system was losing ground. He didn't wake. That night, Eleanor made a bed for herself on the floor near the fire, using her coat as a pillow and the wool blanket as a covering. It wasn't comfortable, but it was warm. She lay there listening to the wind and Cole's breathing and tried not to think about how completely her life had derailed. 2 weeks ago, she'd been in Boston, packing her bags and imagining a future. Now she was in a cabin with a wanted man in the middle of a blizzard with no way out. If she'd known this was where James Farrow's letters would lead her, would she have come? Eleanor thought about it honestly. About the factory where she'd been working 14-hour days for pennies. About Thomas Wickham's proposal, delivered with all the romance of a business transaction. About her aunt's tight-lipped disapproval and the city that had never quite felt like home. Yes, she would have come anyway, because at least here she was choosing her own disaster. On the third day, Cole Barrett woke up. Eleanor was changing his bandages when his eyes opened. That same startling blue she remembered from the first night. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, his expression blank, and then his gaze shifted to her. She froze, her hands still on the bandage she'd been unwrapping. They looked at each other. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible. Eleanor's mouth was dry. "My name is Eleanor Hale." "That's supposed to mean something to me?" "No, I don't expect it does." He tried to sit up and fell back with a grunt of pain. Eleanor didn't move to help him. She wasn't sure if she should. Cole's jaw tightened. He looked around the cabin, taking it in. The fire, the supplies, the bandages on his body. When his gaze came back to Eleanor, there was something calculating in it. "You do this?" He gestured weakly at his chest. "Yes." "Why?" It was a fair question. Eleanor wasn't sure she had a good answer. "Because you were dying." "So? So I wasn't going to let you die on that cot while I sat here and watched." Cole studied her for a long moment. "You're an idiot." Eleanor felt a flash of anger. "You're welcome." His mouth might have twitched. It was hard to tell. "How long?" 3 days. The storm's been going that whole time. We're snowed in." Cole closed his eyes. For a moment, Eleanor thought he'd passed out again, but then he spoke. "There's food?" "Some. Enough for maybe 2 weeks if we're careful." "Water?" "There's a pump outside, but it's frozen. I've been melting snow." He nodded, still not opening his eyes. Smart. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She finished changing the bandages, acutely aware of his eyes on her now, watching every movement. When she was done, she stepped back. "You need to eat something." "Not hungry." "I don't care. You've been burning through fever for 3 days. Your body needs fuel." She expected him to argue, but he just grunted and closed his eyes again. Eleanor heated up some of the cornmeal mush and brought it over. She had to help him sit up. He was too weak to manage it alone, and she was struck again by how massive he was. Even half dead, he was all muscle and bone and controlled strength. He ate slowly, mechanically, like it was a task to be completed rather than something to be enjoyed. "What happened to you?" Eleanor asked. Cole didn't look at her. "None of your business." "I think saving your life earned me some answers." "No, it earned you nothing." He handed back the empty bowl. "I didn't ask you to help me." Eleanor felt her temper flare. "Fine. Next time I'll let you bleed out. How's that?" "Better for both of us." She stood up, shaking with anger. "You are the most ungrateful man I've ever met. And you're still an idiot for being here." Cole lay back down, wincing. "Get out. Go back to wherever you came from before you get yourself killed." "I can't. The storm. I don't care about the storm. When it clears, you leave. Understand?" Eleanor stared at him. "This is James Farrow's cabin." Something changed in Cole's expression. Just a flicker, there and gone. "Farrow's dead." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "You heard me." "How do you know?" Cole's eyes were cold. "Because I killed him." The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. "You're lying," she said finally. "Believe what you want." "Why would you kill him?" "Because he tried to kill me first." Cole gestured at his wounds. This was Pharaoh's doing. Him and 3 other men. They ambushed me on the trail 2 weeks ago. Shot me, stabbed me, left me for dead. But I'm harder to kill than they thought. Eleanor's legs felt weak. She sat down in the chair. "That doesn't make sense. James was... he was supposed to be..." "Your husband?" Cole's laugh was bitter. "Let me guess. He wrote you letters. Promised you a life out here. Sent for you. How did you..." "Because he did the same thing to 2 other women. Took their money and left them stranded. You're just the latest fool." The words should have hurt more than they did, but Eleanor was too numb to feel anything. "Why? Money. Why else?" Pharaoh was a con man. He worked claims that weren't his, sold stakes he didn't own, borrowed from anyone stupid enough to lend to him. And when people started asking questions, he ran. Cole closed his eyes. "But he owed me. Owed me $300 for a claim we were supposed to work together, so I tracked him down." "And killed him." "And killed him," Cole agreed. "But not before he told his friends where to find me. They figured if they took me out, the debt died too." Eleanor's mind was reeling. Every piece of the story she'd built, every assumption she'd made about James Pharaoh, about her future, was crumbling. "Where is he, James's body?" "Bottom of a ravine about 5 miles east of here. If you want to go looking for it, be my guest." She believed him. That was the worst part. Every word Cole said had the ring of truth, and Eleanor realized with sick certainty that she'd been played from the start. James Pharaoh had never intended to marry her. He'd just wanted her money, the money she'd gotten from selling everything she owned, the money that was now gone. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling. The world was white and endless and utterly indifferent to her pain. Behind her, Cole said, "I'll be gone soon as I can walk. You can have the cabin until spring if you want it. I don't care." Eleanor didn't turn around. "And the men who attacked you? The ones who helped James? What about them? Are they still out there?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Probably." "Will they come looking for you?" "Maybe. Maybe not. Depends how sure they are I'm dead." Eleanor finally turned to face him. "So even if the storm clears, I'm not safe." Cole met her eyes. "Lady, you stopped being safe the moment you stepped foot in this territory. This place eats people like you." "People like me?" "Yeah. Soft. Unprepared. Too stupid to know when they're beaten." Eleanor felt something harden in her chest. She crossed the room and stood over Cole's cot, looking down at him with an expression that made him blink. "You think I'm soft?" she said quietly. "You think I came out here because I had other options? I sold everything I owned. I left behind everyone I knew. I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man I'd never met, because staying where I was meant dying slow. So don't you dare call me soft." Cole's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something like respect. "I stitched you back together," Eleanor continued. "I kept you alive when you should have died. I did that with no training and no help and no idea what I was doing. And I'll keep doing it until you're healed. Not because I like you, I don't, but because that's who I am. I don't quit." She stepped back. "So you can insult me all you want, but I'm not leaving, not until I'm ready. And when I do leave, it'll be my choice, not yours." Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth, there and gone. "All right then. All right then," Eleanor echoed. She went back to the fire and started preparing dinner, her hands steady even though her heart was pounding. Behind her, she heard Cole shift on the cot, heard him grunt with pain. "Eleanor." She turned. "What?" "Thank you." The words sounded like they cost him something. "For the stitches." Eleanor nodded. "You're welcome." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days blurred together after that. Eleanor fell into a rhythm born of necessity. Wake when the gray light filtered through the shutters, build up the fire, melt snow for water, check Cole's bandages, prepare whatever meager breakfast their supplies allowed. The cabin was 12 feet by 14 feet, and sharing it with a man who could barely stand felt like living inside a too small box with something dangerous and unpredictable. Cole was a terrible patient. He refused help when he needed it, pushed himself too hard, and went silent for hours at a time, staring at the ceiling with an expression that suggested he was somewhere else entirely. On the fourth day after he'd woken, Eleanor found him trying to stand on his own, using the wall for support. His face was gray with pain and his legs were shaking. "What are you doing?" She crossed the cabin in 3 strides. "What's it look like?" "It looks like you're trying to tear open every stitch I put in you." Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Sit down before you fall down." Cole jerked away from her touch. "I don't need a nursemaid." "Well, you've got one anyway. Now sit." They stared at each other. Cole was still bigger than her, even half dead, and for a moment Eleanor wondered if he'd actually hit her. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. But then something shifted in his expression, and he lowered himself back onto the cot with a grunt that might have been pain or might have been frustration. "You're going to hurt yourself," Eleanor said. "I heal fast." "Not that fast." She knelt to examine his leg. The bullet wound was still angry-looking, though it wasn't infected anymore. "You need at least another week before you should be walking." "We don't have another week." "Why not?" Cole didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the window at the wall of white beyond it. "Storm's going to break soon, day or 2 at most. When it does, we need to be ready to move." "Move where?" "Anywhere but here." Eleanor sat back on her heels. "You think they'll come? The men who attacked you?" "I know they will." Cole's voice was flat, certain. Pharaoh had a partner, a man named Vince Holloway. He was the one who organized the ambush, and Holloway doesn't leave loose ends. "How do you know he'll find this place?" "Because he knows about the cabin. Pharaoh brought him here once, back when we were still pretending to be partners." Cole's mouth twisted. "Soon as the weather clears, Holloway's going to come check if Pharaoh left anything worth taking, and if he finds me alive, he'll finish what he started." Eleanor felt ice in her stomach. "Then we leave before he gets here." "You leave. I'll handle Holloway. In your condition, you can barely stand." "I'll manage. You'll die." Eleanor stood up. "And then he'll come after me anyway, because I'm a witness. So if you want to be stupid and noble, fine. But don't pretend you're protecting me." Cole looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "You always this mouthy?" "Only when people are being idiots." The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Fair enough." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay on the floor near the fire, listening to Cole's breathing and the wind outside, and tried to think through their options. They could try to make it down to Red Hollow, but that was at least 8 miles in snow that was probably 3 feet deep by now. Cole couldn't walk that far. And even if they made it, what then? She had no money. Cole was wanted. They'd be right back where they started, except surrounded by people who might turn them in for the reward. They could stay and hope Holloway didn't come. But that wasn't hope. That was just waiting to die. Or they could fight. Eleanor had never hit anyone in her life. She'd never even held a gun. But lying there in the dark, she found herself thinking about the knife in Cole's coat pocket, about the rifle that was propped in the corner near the door, about what it would take to survive. She'd come west looking for a fresh start. She'd gotten a war instead. The question was whether she had the stomach for it. Cole started teaching her the next morning, not because she asked, she didn't, but because he apparently decided on his own that she was more useful alive than dead. He started with the rifle. "You ever shoot before?" He was sitting on the edge of the cot, the Winchester across his lap. His hands moved over it with the kind of easy familiarity that came from long practice. "No." "Figured." He held it out. "Take it." Eleanor took the rifle. It was heavier than she'd expected, the wood smooth under her hands. She'd seen guns before, plenty of them, on the streets of Red Hollow and in the hands of men on the stagecoach, but she'd never touched one. "It's not loaded," Cole said. "First rule, assume every gun is loaded anyway. Second rule, don't point it at anything you're not willing to kill. You understand?" Eleanor nodded. "Good. Now look here." He pointed to different parts of the rifle, explaining what each piece did: the trigger, the hammer, the sight. His voice was patient, methodical. It was the most he'd said to her in days. "When you aim, you want to line up the front sight with the notch in the back. See that?" Eleanor squinted down the barrel. "I think so." "Don't think. No. Your target's not going to wait for you to figure it out." Cole shifted, wincing. "Press the stock tight against your shoulder. Tighter. The recoil's going to knock you back if you don't have it secured. They spent an hour like that, with Cole correcting her grip, her stance, the way she held her breath when she aimed. Eleanor's arms ached from holding the rifle up. Her shoulder was sore from where the stock pressed against it. But she didn't complain. "You're not half bad," Cole said finally, "for someone who's never done this before." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." Eleanor lowered the rifle. "When do I get to actually shoot it?" "When I'm sure you won't shoot me by accident." Cole held out his hand. "Give it here." She handed it back and watched him load it with quick, efficient movements. 5 bullets into the magazine, 1 in the chamber. He set the safety and propped it back in the corner. "How many bullets do we have?" Eleanor asked. 23, so we don't waste them." "That's not very many." "It's enough if you make them count." The next lesson was the knife. Cole had her practice basic cuts and thrusts, using a piece of firewood as a target. Her hands blistered. She dropped the knife twice. But by the end of the afternoon, she could hit the same spot on the wood 3 times in a row. "Better," Cole said. "But fighting a piece of wood's not the same as fighting a man."
"I know that." "Do you?" He looked at her. "When Holloway comes, if he comes, he's not going to give you time to think. He's going to come hard and fast and mean. You hesitate, you die. You understand?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I won't hesitate." "Easy to say now." "Then I guess we'll find out." Something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or at least an acknowledgement. They were in this together now, whether either of them liked it or not. That night, Eleanor made stew from the dried beans and the last of the cornmeal. It wasn't good, but it was hot and filling. They ate in silence, Cole at the table and Eleanor sitting on the floor near the fire. When they finished, Cole pushed his bowl away. "Tell me about Boston," he said. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I'm bored and you're here." It wasn't exactly a gracious request, but it was more than he'd offered before. Eleanor set down her bowl. "What do you want to know?" "Why'd you leave?" "I told you I didn't have a choice." "Everyone's got a choice. Not good ones." Eleanor stared into the fire. "My father died when I was 4. My mother worked as a seamstress, but it was never enough. We barely got by. When she got sick, I took work at a factory to pay for medicine. And when she died anyway, I just kept working. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that wouldn't cover rent and food both." Cole said nothing, just listened. "I had a landlord's son who wanted to marry me," Eleanor continued. "Thomas Wickham. He wasn't cruel exactly, just empty. Like marrying him would be the same as marrying a piece of furniture, and I kept thinking, is this it? Is this all my life is going to be? Factory work and a loveless marriage and dying slow in a city that doesn't care?" "So you answered Pharaoh's letter." "So I answered his letter." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought I was being brave. Thought I was taking control of my life, but turns out I was just trading one trap for another." "Not a trap if you can fight your way out." "Can I?" Eleanor looked at him. "I don't know what I'm doing, Cole. I can barely shoot. I've never been in a fight. And I'm supposed to help you defend this cabin against men who kill people for money?" "You're supposed to survive," Cole said. "That's all. Everything else is just details." "Easy for you to say. You know how to do this. You've probably killed before." Cole's expression went flat. "More than I can count." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He just stood up, still moving carefully, but stronger than he'd been even a day ago, and walked to the window. "My turn," he said. "You want to know how I ended up like this? Only if you want to tell me." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters. "I grew up in Missouri, farm country. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she stopped getting up one day. I was 12. I killed him with a shovel and ran." Eleanor's breath caught. "Spent the next 5 years doing whatever it took to stay alive," Cole continued, his voice emotionless. "Stole food, slept in barns, worked claims for men who didn't pay. And when the war started, I joined up because at least the army fed you." "Which side?" "Does it matter? I saw enough blood to last a lifetime either way." Cole turned from the window. "When it was over, I came west. Figured the frontier was far enough from everything I'd been. And for a while, it worked. I worked claims, saved money, stayed out of trouble.
Then I met Pharaoh. And he betrayed you. And he betrayed me. Cole's jaw tightened. I should have seen it coming. Man like that, you can smell the rot on him. But I wanted to believe people could be decent. Wanted to think I'd left the worst of humanity back east. You were wrong. Yeah, I was wrong. Cole moved back to the cot and sat down. So here we are. Two people who made bad choices, stuck in a cabin, waiting for worse people to find us. Eleanor wanted to argue with that characterization, but she couldn't. It was too accurate. Instead, she asked, what happens after? After what? After Holloway. After all this. What do you do? Cole looked at her like she'd asked him to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I don't think that far ahead. Why not? Because I've never had much use for plans. You make a plan, life just finds a way to wreck it. He lay back on the cot. I take things as they come, one day at a time.
That sounds lonely. It is what it is. Eleanor studied him in the firelight. He was closed off, guarded in a way that went deeper than just his words. Whatever Cole Barrett had been through, it had taught him not to expect anything good, not to hope. She recognized that. She'd felt it herself in the years after her mother died. I used to think like that, Eleanor said. After my mother, I just went through the motions. Work, sleep, work again. I told myself I didn't want anything because wanting hurt too much when you didn't get it. So what changed? Pharaoh's letter. Eleanor smiled sadly. I know that sounds stupid now, but reading those letters, imagining a different life, it made me feel something again, made me want something. Even if it was all a lie, at least I felt alive. Cole turned his head to look at her. You still feel alive? More than I want to sometimes. That's the worst part, isn't it? His voice was quiet. When staying numb would be easier, but you can't quite manage it anymore. Eleanor nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. They didn't talk much after that, but something had shifted between them. Not friendship. It was too early and too fragile for that. But maybe the beginning of trust. An acknowledgement that they'd both been broken by the world in different ways, and that breaking didn't make them weak. The storm finally ended on the 7th day. Eleanor woke to silence, real silence, not the muffled howl of wind, and knew immediately that something had changed. She got up and opened the shutters. Sunlight stabbed into the cabin, bright and merciless. Outside, the world was buried under snow that glittered like broken glass. It's over, she said. Cole was already awake. How deep? Eleanor judged the drifts against the cabin wall. 3 feet, maybe more in places. That gives us a day. Maybe 2. Cole swung his legs off the cot and stood. He still moved stiffly, but he was steady on his feet now. We need to prepare. They spent the morning fortifying the cabin. Cole directed and Eleanor worked, nailing boards over the windows except for narrow gaps to shoot through. They moved everything flammable away from the walls. Cole showed her how to reload the rifle quickly, how to keep extra ammunition close. They practiced until Eleanor could load and chamber a round in under 10 seconds. What if there's more than one? Eleanor asked. There will be. How many? Holloway for sure, probably 2 others. Maybe 3. Cole checked the rifle's action. They'll come from different directions. Try to surround us. So we're outnumbered. We've got better position. High ground, solid walls, and they don't know I'm still alive. Cole met her eyes. That's worth more than numbers. Eleanor wanted to believe him. But the reality was that they were 2 people, one barely recovered from near death, one who'd never been in a fight, against professional killers. The odds weren't good. Show me the plan, she said. Cole laid it out. He'd take the window facing the trail where he had the best sightline. Eleanor would cover the back and the blind spot near the door. If things went bad, if they got inside, she was to barricade herself in the corner near the fireplace and make them come to her one at a time. And if they get past both of us? Eleanor asked. Cole handed her the knife. You use this, aim for the throat or the gut. Don't try to be fancy. Eleanor took the knife. Her hand was steady, which surprised her. Have you done this before? Defended against a siege? Once. Different war, different cabin, but the principles are the same. Did you win? Cole's smile was grim. I'm still here. That afternoon, they ate what was left of the beans. There wasn't much else. Their supplies were running dangerously low, maybe 3 days' worth if they stretched it. But that didn't matter now.
3 days from now, they'd either be dead or this would all be over. Eleanor cleaned the bowls and set them aside. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, exactly. More like the nervous energy of waiting for something inevitable. You scared? Cole asked. Terrified. Good. Scared keeps you sharp. He was cleaning his knife, the blade gleaming in the firelight. You freeze up out there. You think about what happens if you don't fight. Think about what men like Holloway do to women they catch. Eleanor's stomach turned. That's not helpful. It's not supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to make you angry enough to survive. She looked at him. Is that what you do? Get angry? Every damn day. Cole sheathed the knife. Anger's kept me alive more times than I can count. Fear makes you hesitate. Anger makes you move. Eleanor thought about that. About all the times she'd swallowed her anger, pushed it down, been polite and accommodating because that's what women were supposed to do. What would happen if she let it out? Teach me, she said. Cole raised an eyebrow. Teach you what? How to be angry, how to use it. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Come here. Eleanor stood and crossed to where he sat. Cole pointed to the center of the cabin. Stand there. Now think about everything that's been done to you. Every time someone took advantage, every time you got knocked down, your father dying, your mother working herself to death. Pharaoh's lies. All of it. Eleanor closed her eyes. The memories came easily, too easily. Feel that? Cole's voice was closer now. That burn in your chest? That's what you use. When Holloway comes through that door, you remember every person who ever made you feel small, and you make them pay for all of it. Eleanor opened her eyes. The burn was there, hot and bright and fierce. There you go, Cole said. Hold on to that. They waited. One day passed, then another. Eleanor slept in shifts, the rifle beside her. Cole kept watch at the window, his eyes scanning the tree line. They spoke less now, both of them wound tight with anticipation. On the morning of the 9th day, Cole saw the smoke. They're here, he said quietly. Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat. Where? Down the trail, 1/2 mile, maybe less. Cole checked his rifle. 3 of them, just like I thought. Eleanor moved to her position by the back window. Through the gap in the boards, she could see the forest, dark pines heavy with snow. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean they weren't out there. Remember the plan, Cole said. Don't shoot until I do. Make every bullet count. I remember. Minutes crawled by. Eleanor's palms were sweating despite the cold. She gripped the rifle tighter, her finger resting beside the trigger guard the way Cole had taught her. Then she heard it, a voice, distant but clear. Barrett, we know you're in there. Cole didn't respond. Come on out, Barrett. We just want to talk. Eleanor glanced over at Cole. His expression was stone. We can do this easy or hard, the voice continued. Your choice. Cole raised his rifle and aimed through the window gap. Get ready, he said quietly. The world seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. She tried to focus, tried to remember everything Cole had taught her. Breathe, aim, don't hesitate. All right then, the voice outside was closer now. Hard way it is? The first shot shattered the morning silence. Cole fired back immediately, the rifle's crack deafening in the small cabin. Eleanor heard someone scream, a high animal sound of pain. One down! Cole was already working the lever, chambering another round. Watch your side! Eleanor spun toward the back window just in time to see movement in the trees. A man was circling wide, trying to get behind them. She raised the rifle, her hand surprisingly steady, and sighted down the barrel. The man stepped into the open. Eleanor pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The man dropped. Good shot! Cole's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. Reload! Eleanor's hands moved automatically. Muscle memory from hours of practice. Eject, load, chamber. She was ready again in seconds. Another shot from Cole's window. Another scream. How many left? Eleanor shouted. Just Holloway. He's behind the woodpile. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Somewhere outside, a man was groaning. The one Eleanor had shot, probably. She tried not to think about that. Holloway, Cole called out. You're alone. Give it up. Go to hell, Barrett. A flurry of shots peppered the cabin wall. Eleanor ducked instinctively, even though the bullets weren't anywhere near her window. When the shooting stopped, she risked a look. Still nothing from her angle. "He's pinned down," Cole said, "but we can't get a clean shot. He knows it." "So what do we do?" "We wait him out. He's got limited ammunition, same as us. Eventually he'll—" The crash of breaking wood cut him off. Eleanor whirled around. The back door, the one they'd reinforced but couldn't completely seal, was splintering. Someone was kicking it in. "Cole!" He was already moving, crossing the cabin with his rifle raised. But he was still too slow, still healing. The door burst open and a fourth man, one they'd somehow missed, came through with a shotgun. Cole fired. Missed. The man fired back. The blast caught Cole in the side, spinning him around. He went down hard. Eleanor didn't think. She raised the rifle and fired. The man staggered. She fired again. He fell. Then she was at Cole's side, her hands already reaching for him. Blood soaked his shirt, spreading fast, too fast. "I'm okay," Cole gasped. "I'm okay." "You're shot." "I noticed." His face was pale. "Holloway, where's—" The front door exploded inward. Eleanor spun, bringing the rifle up, but a boot kicked it out of her hands before she could fire. A man, tall, scarred, with eyes like chips of ice, stood in the doorway. Vince Holloway. He had a pistol pointed at her head. "Don't move, girl." Eleanor froze. Holloway stepped inside, his gun never wavering. He glanced at Cole, at the blood spreading beneath him, and smiled. "Looks like we finally got you, Barrett. Took long enough." Cole tried to sit up, failed. "Go to hell. After you." Holloway cocked the pistol. "I was going to make this quick, professional, but you killed 3 of my men, so I think I'll take my time." He swung the gun toward Cole. Eleanor grabbed the knife from her belt and lunged. She didn't aim for the throat like Cole had taught her. She aimed for whatever she could reach. The blade caught Holloway in the ribs, sliding between bones with resistance that made her stomach turn. He roared and backhanded her across the face. Eleanor hit the floor hard enough to see stars. Through blurred vision, she saw Holloway yank the knife out of his side. Blood ran down his shirt, but he was still standing, still dangerous. He pointed the gun at her. "You little—" The gunshot was impossibly loud. Holloway's head snapped back. He stood there for a moment, swaying, then collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Eleanor looked over. Cole was propped against the wall, his rifle somehow in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. "Told you," he said. His voice was weak. "Make every shot count." Then he passed out. Eleanor's ears were still ringing from the gunshot when she scrambled to Cole's side. His eyes had rolled back, showing only white, and the blood from the shotgun wound was pooling beneath him in a dark, spreading stain that looked black in the dim cabin light. "No, no, no, no!" Her hands shook as she pressed them against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. The warmth of it shocked her. She'd expected it to be cold somehow, like the snow outside. But it was hot and sticky, and there was so much of it. Cole didn't respond. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. Eleanor's mind raced. She'd stitched him up once before, but that had been different. He'd been unconscious then, passive. This was active trauma, fresh and devastating. The shotgun blast had torn through the meat of his side just below his ribs. She could see bone. Her stomach lurched, but she forced the nausea down. Panic wouldn't help. Screaming wouldn't help. The only thing that would help was action. She dragged herself to the medical supplies, what little remained. Her hands found the whiskey bottle, nearly empty now, thread and needle, bandages that were really just torn strips of her petticoat. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all she had. Eleanor poured whiskey over the wound. Cole's body jerked and a sound came from his throat. Half groan, half scream. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. "Stay still," Eleanor said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to stop the bleeding." "Eleanor," his hand grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Leave it." "I'm not leaving anything. Now let go." "Too much blood. You can't—" "I already did it once. I can do it again." She pulled her wrist free and went back to work. The wound was ragged, the edges torn rather than cut clean. She'd have to debride it first, cut away the destroyed tissue before she could even think about stitching. Her hands moved while her mind screamed. She'd never done anything like this. She had no training, no real knowledge beyond what she'd learned stitching Cole up the first time, and a vague memory of her mother treating a neighbor's knife wound when Eleanor was 8. This wasn't medicine. This was butchery. But she did it anyway. Cole passed out again somewhere in the middle of it, which was probably a mercy. Eleanor worked by feel as much as sight, her fingers slippery with blood. She packed the wound with cloth soaked in whiskey, then stitched what she could. The needle slipped twice. She had to restart a section when the thread broke. By the time she finished, her entire body was shaking and she was covered in blood up to her elbows. She bound the wound with the last of the bandages and sat back. Cole was still breathing. Barely. Eleanor looked around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. Bodies, 4 of them. Holloway by the door. The man she'd shot lying half in and half out of the back entrance, and 2 more outside that she could see through the shattered windows. The floor was tracked with blood and mud and snow. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixing with the copper scent of blood. They'd won, but the victory tasted like ash. Eleanor forced herself to stand. Her legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the table for support and waited for the dizziness to pass. Then she moved to the door and looked outside. The clearing around the cabin was churned up with footprints and blood spray. One of Cole's shots had hit a man near the woodpile. She could see him lying face down in the snow, a dark red stain spreading around his head like a grotesque halo. The other body was closer, the man she'd shot through the back window. He wasn't moving either. 4 men dead. Eleanor had killed at least one of them herself, maybe 2. She should have felt something, horror, guilt, revulsion. But there was only numbness and the cold, practical knowledge that if she didn't move those bodies, predators would come. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. And right now, with Cole unconscious and barely alive, she couldn't defend against anything. Eleanor dragged Holloway out first. He was heavy, dead weight in the most literal sense. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled, her boots slipping on the bloody floor. It took her 10 minutes to get him outside and another 5 to drag him far enough from the cabin that she didn't have to look at his face. The others took longer. By the time she finished, the sun was setting and her back screamed with pain. She'd strained something, pulled a muscle. Didn't matter. She went back inside and barred what was left of the doors. Then she built up the fire, boiled water, and cleaned the blood off herself as best she could. Her dress was ruined. She changed into the only other clothes she had, a spare shirt that had belonged to James Farrow, and her own wool skirt. Everything else was too bloody to salvage. Cole hadn't moved. Eleanor checked his pulse, weak but steady, and adjusted his bandages. The bleeding had slowed to a seep. That was good. That was something. She made herself eat a handful of cornmeal, dry because she couldn't stomach the thought of cooking. Then she sat down on the floor next to Cole's cot and waited. The night was long. Every sound outside made her jump. Every creak of the cabin settling made her reach for the rifle. But nothing came. No one came. They were alone. Cole's fever returned around midnight. Eleanor fought it the same way she had before. Cold compresses, whiskey forced between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. He muttered things in his delirium, fragments of sentences that didn't quite make sense, names she didn't recognize, apologies to people who weren't there. "Hush," Eleanor said, more to herself than to him. "You're going to be fine. You have to be fine." She didn't believe it, but she said it anyway. By morning, Cole's fever had broken again. Eleanor woke slumped against the cot, her neck stiff and her head pounding. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The fight, the blood, the bodies. She stood and stretched, wincing at the pain in her muscles. Outside, the sun was shining. It looked obscene somehow, that brightness. Like the world didn't know or didn't care what had happened in this cabin. Eleanor checked their supplies. 2 days of food left. Maybe 3 if she was careful. The water situation was better. She could keep melting snow. But Cole needed real food, protein, something to help him heal, which meant she needed to hunt. The rifle was still where she'd dropped it during the fight. Eleanor picked it up and checked the mechanism the way Cole had taught her. It was undamaged. She had 8 bullets left. She'd never hunted in her life, but she'd watched Cole clean his rifle, load it, sight down the barrel. She knew the mechanics of it. The rest was just pointing and pulling the trigger. Eleanor put on Farrow's old coat, warmer than her own, and stepped outside. The forest was silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine branches. Snow crunched under her boots. Eleanor's breath came out in white clouds. She moved slowly, scanning the trees for movement. Cole had told her once that deer liked to bed down in thickets, that you could find rabbit tracks near fallen logs. She found rabbit tracks after 20 minutes of searching. They led into a dense section of brush. Eleanor crouched and waited, the rifle ready. The rabbit appeared 10 minutes later, nosing through the snow for whatever vegetation it could find. Brown fur against white snow, an easy shot. Eleanor aimed. Her finger rested on the trigger. The rabbit's nose twitched. She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest. Birds scattered from the trees, and the rabbit dropped. Eleanor walked over to it on shaking legs. It was still twitching, not quite dead. She'd hit it in the shoulder instead of the head. Sloppy shooting. Cole would have been disappointed. She drew the knife and finished it quickly, the way she'd seen her mother dispatch chickens years ago. One cut. The twitching stopped. Eleanor carried it back to the cabin and skinned it on the table, working by memory and instinct. The pelt was damaged from the bullet, but the meat was good. She cut it into pieces and set them in the pot to stew with melted snow and the last of their salt. When the stew was ready, she ate half and saved the rest for Cole. If he woke up. When he woke up. 3 more days passed like that. Eleanor hunted in the mornings, killed rabbits, and once a small deer that she butchered badly but butchered nonetheless. She kept the fire going, kept Cole's wounds clean, kept herself from thinking too hard about what would happen if he didn't recover. The cabin was hers now, in a way it hadn't been before. She'd bled for it, fought for it, killed for it. The bodies outside were already disappearing under fresh snowfall, and soon it would be like they'd never existed. But Eleanor would remember. She'd remember the weight of the rifle, the way it kicked against her shoulder, the sound of a man screaming when she'd put a bullet in his chest, the hot spray of blood when she'd stabbed Holloway. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross. On the 4th day, Cole woke up. Eleanor was stirring the stew when she heard him groan. She turned to find him looking at her, his eyes clear for the first time since the shooting. "You're alive," she said. Surprised? Honestly? Yes. Cole tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His face went gray and he fell back with a hiss of pain. How long? 4 days. Jesus. He looked around the cabin, taking in the boarded windows, the repaired door. Holloway? Dead. They're all dead. Eleanor brought him a cup of water. Here, drink. He drank slowly, his hand shaking. When he finished, he looked at her again, really looked at her. You did this alone. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice. You could have left. Eleanor set down the cup. We've already had this conversation. I don't quit. Something like a smile crossed Cole's face. No, I don't suppose you do. She fed him the stew in small spoonfuls. He ate mechanically, his eyes never leaving her face. When he was done, he said, "Tell me what happened." After I passed out. Eleanor told him, the stitching, the bodies, the hunting. She kept her voice level, factual. But halfway through, her hand started shaking and she had to stop. Hey! Cole's voice was rough. You did good. You hear me. You did better than good. I killed people. You survived. That's what matters. Is it? Eleanor looked at her hands. They looked the same as they always had. She didn't understand how that was possible. I shot a man in the back, stabbed another, and I don't feel anything about it. You will. Later, when you have time. Cole shifted carefully. For now, the fact that you don't feel it is what's keeping you sane. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the coldness in her own eyes when she'd looked in the broken mirror that morning. Recognized something in her reflection that hadn't been there before. She'd changed. The question was whether she'd changed into something she could live with. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Cole was healing faster this time, though he'd never admit how much pain he was in. Eleanor could see it in the way he moved, the tightness around his eyes. But he was stubborn. Within a week, he was standing on his own. Within 2, he was walking short distances. Eleanor kept hunting. She was getting better at it. Cleaner kills, less wasted ammunition. She'd figured out how to set snares for rabbits, which saved bullets. Cole showed her how to tan the hides, how to stretch them and scrape them until they were soft enough to use. "Why are we bothering with this?" Eleanor asked one afternoon. She was elbow deep in a rabbit pelt, scraping away the fat and membrane. "We're not staying here." "Aren't we?" She looked up. Cole was sitting at the table, working on a snare from thin wire. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. "The snow's going to melt eventually," Eleanor said. "We can't stay in this cabin forever." "Why not?" "Because—" She stopped. She didn't actually have a good answer. "Because it's not a life. Hiding up here. Better than what's waiting down there." Cole gestured vaguely toward where Red Hollow would be, miles away through the mountains. "You go back to that town, you're still a woman alone with no money and no prospects. I go back, I'm a wanted man. We both lose." "So what are you suggesting? We just live up here like hermits?" "I'm suggesting we take it one day at a time, same as we have been." Cole finished the snare and set it aside. "Winter's not even half over. We've got months before the snow melts enough to travel. Plenty of time to figure out what comes next." Eleanor went back to scraping the hide. He wasn't wrong. The snow was still falling regularly, and the drifts were so deep in places that you couldn't see the ground underneath. Travel would be impossible until at least March, maybe April, which meant they were trapped together for another 3 months minimum. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost comforting. "All right," she said, "one day at a time." Cole taught her other things as the weeks passed. How to read weather signs in the clouds. How to find water when the creek was frozen. How to tell which plants were edible and which would kill you. He taught her tracking. How to recognize deer prints from elk. How to tell the age of tracks by the way the snow had filled them in. "You're a good teacher," Eleanor said one day. They were following a deer trail through the pines, moving slowly because Cole still tired easily. Had a lot of practice. "With who?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "My sister, before our mother died. I used to take her into the woods behind our farm, teach her things our father should have taught both of us." Eleanor had never heard him mention a sister before. "What happened to her?" "Died. Same winter as our mother." His voice was flat. "Fever. I tried to get medicine, but we had no money. By the time I stole enough, it was too late." "I'm sorry. Long time ago." Cole paused, examining a broken branch. "Deer came through here maybe an hour ago. See how the break is still green inside?" Eleanor looked. He was right. "How do you know it was a deer and not an elk?" "Size of the print. Elk are heavier, sink deeper." He pointed. "And deer move different. See how these tracks are close together? That's a cautious walk. Elk don't care as much. They just crash through." They followed the trail for another half mile before Cole called it off. He was breathing hard, favoring his injured side. "We should head back," Eleanor said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're pushing too hard." She took his arm. "Come on. We can try again tomorrow." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but he let her guide him back toward the cabin. They walked in silence for a while, picking their way through the snow. "You remind me of her," Cole said suddenly. "My sister." Same stubbornness. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But something warm bloomed in her chest anyway. By February, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Eleanor had made curtains from rabbit hides for the windows. She'd organized their dwindling supplies, hunted regularly enough that they weren't starving. Cole had repaired the furniture, reinforced the walls, built shelves for storage. They worked together without needing to discuss it. Cole would start a task, and Eleanor would help without being asked. She'd begin something and he'd finish it. They moved around each other in the small space like dancers who'd practiced the same routine 100 times. At night, they talked, not about anything important at first. The weather, the hunting, small observations about the world outside the cabin. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Cole told her about the war, about the things he'd seen and done. Eleanor told him about Boston, about her mother's death and the years that followed. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked one night. They were sitting by the fire, Eleanor mending a shirt while Cole sharpened his knife. "Coming west?" Eleanor thought about it. "Sometimes, but not the way you'd think." "How then?" "I regret believing Pharaoh's lies. I regret being naive enough to trust him." She set down the shirt. But I don't regret leaving Boston. Even knowing what I know now, even after everything that happened, I'd still leave. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cole tested the knife's edge against his thumb. It makes sense. What about you? Do you regret killing Pharaoh? No. The answer was immediate. He had it coming. But it's what brought Holloway and his men here. If you'd just let it go, then I'd still be a man who let people walk all over him, and you'd still be stranded in Red Hollow with nothing. Cole looked at her. Some things you can't let go. Some things you have to answer. Eleanor understood that. She'd felt it herself when she'd stabbed Holloway. The cold certainty that this man needed to die, that there was no other acceptable outcome. I killed a man, she said quietly, and I don't feel bad about it. What does that make me? Alive. Cole went back to sharpening. Guilt's a luxury, Eleanor. You can afford it when you're safe and fed and warm, but when you're fighting to survive, guilt just gets you killed. Is that what you tell yourself? It's what I know. The knife scraped against the whetstone, a rhythmic sound. I've killed more men than I can count. Some deserved it, some probably didn't, but every single one of them would have killed me if I'd given them the chance. So no, I don't lose sleep over it. Eleanor picked up the shirt again and continued mending. You're a hard man, Cole Barrett. Have to be. This world eats soft people. I used to be soft. Used to be. He looked at her with something like respect. You're not anymore. It was true. Eleanor could feel it in herself, the hardness that had grown like scar tissue over the past months. She'd killed, survived, adapted. The woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Red Hollow would barely recognize what she'd become. The question was whether that was a good thing. March came with warmer days and the first signs that winter was loosening its grip. The snow still fell, but not as heavily. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves. The creek started to thaw, revealing black water that rushed over rocks. Cole was fully healed now, moving without pain. He'd started ranging farther from the cabin, checking the trails, making sure no one else had wandered into their territory. Eleanor went with him sometimes, learning the land, memorizing landmarks. We should talk about what happens when the snow melts, Cole said one afternoon. They were sitting on a fallen log looking out over the valley below. From here they could see for miles, nothing but pine forest and snow-covered peaks. I know. Eleanor had been avoiding this conversation. You'll leave. That was the plan. And I'll... What? Stay here alone? Cole was quiet. You could come with me. Eleanor's heart jumped. Where would we go? North, Canada, maybe. Or further west, Oregon. Somewhere far enough that my past doesn't matter. He looked at her. But it would be rough. We'd be on the move for months, living off the land, avoiding towns. It's not the life you imagined when you came west. I stopped imagining that life a long time ago. Eleanor watched a hawk circle overhead. What would I do? If I came with you? Same thing you've been doing. Hunt, survive. Help me stay alive when I do something stupid. He almost smiled. You're good at that. Is that what we'd be? Partners? If you want. Eleanor thought about it. Really thought about it. She could go with Cole, disappear into the wilderness, build whatever life they could scrape together, or she could try to make it on her own. Go back to Red Hollow, find work somehow, start over. Both options terrified her, but one option had Cole in it. And despite everything, despite the violence, despite the blood, despite the fact that they'd known each other for barely 3 months, she trusted him. More than that, she needed him. Not in a weak way, not in the way she'd needed James Farrow's promises, but in the way partners needed each other, equal and essential. I want, she said. Cole nodded. All right then. They didn't talk about it again, didn't need to. The decision had been made. But the mountains had other plans. The stranger appeared on a morning in late March. Eleanor saw him first, a figure moving through the trees, stumbling in the deep snow. She grabbed the rifle and called for Cole. Someone's coming. Cole was at the window in seconds. How many? Just one. Looks like he's hurt. They watched as the figure got closer. It was a man, young, maybe 20. His face was pale and his coat was torn. He was leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Could be a trick, Cole said. Holloway had friends. Or he could be dying. Eleanor lowered the rifle slightly. We should at least see what he wants. Cole gave her a look that said this was a bad idea, but he didn't stop her when she opened the door. The young man looked up. His eyes were glazed with pain and cold. "Please," he said. "Please, help me." Then he collapsed in the snow. Eleanor and Cole looked at each other. Then, despite every instinct screaming at them to leave the stranger where he fell, they went out and dragged him inside. They laid him on the floor near the fire, and Eleanor was already cutting away his coat before Cole had even closed the door. The young man's breathing was shallow, his skin the color of old paper. He'd been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the leg. Neither wound was fresh. Maybe 3 days old, judging by the infection that had already set in. "He's burning up," Eleanor said, pressing her hand to his forehead. Cole stood over them, the rifle still in his hands. Could still be a setup, someone using him as bait. "Look at him, he's barely conscious." Eleanor was already heating water, moving with the practiced efficiency she'd learned from patching Cole back together twice now. If this is a trick, it's an elaborate one. The elaborate ones are the ones that work. But Cole moved to the window and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved out there except wind through the pines. "I'll keep watch. You do what you need to do." Eleanor cleaned the wounds and was relieved to find that at least the bullets had passed through. No digging required. But the infection was bad, worse than Cole's had been. She used the last of their whiskey to flush the wounds, and the young man came awake with a scream that turned into a sob. "Easy," Eleanor said. "I'm trying to help you." His eyes focused on her with difficulty. They're coming. You have to—" "Who's coming?" Said they'd. His words dissolved into incoherent mumbling. The fever had him again. Eleanor looked at Cole. "Did you catch any of that?" "Enough." Cole's expression was grim. "We need answers. Fast." But the young man wasn't offering any. He drifted in and out of consciousness while Eleanor stitched and bandaged. When she finished, she sat back and wiped the sweat from her forehead. "That's all I can do. Rest is up to him." "Hope he makes it long enough to tell us who's hunting him." Cole finally lowered the rifle. "Because someone is. You don't get shot twice by accident." They took turns watching through the night. Cole at the window, Eleanor checking the young man's fever. Around dawn, he finally woke up enough to talk. "Water," he rasped. Eleanor brought him a cup. He drank greedily, spilling half of it down his chin. When he finished, he looked at her with clearer eyes. "Thank you. I thought I was dead for sure." "You still might be if you don't tell us what's going on." Cole appeared beside Eleanor, arms crossed. "Who shot you?" "Men from Red Hollow. 4 of them, maybe 5. The young man tried to sit up and immediately thought better of it. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Reeves." "Why were they shooting at you, Daniel?" Eleanor asked. "Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "There's a man in Red Hollow, Garrett Sloan. Runs most of the businesses in town, owns half the claims in the mountains. Everyone thinks he's legitimate, but he's not. He's been running a claim-jumping operation for 2 years. Finds prospectors who strike it rich, has his men kill them, takes over their claims." Cole's jaw tightened. "Farrow worked for him." "You knew James Farrow?" Daniel looked surprised. "He's dead." "Good. He was one of Sloan's recruiters. Would find people back east, convince them to come west, take their money." Daniel coughed, a wet sound. "I was keeping books for one of Sloan's legitimate businesses, saw records I wasn't supposed to see. Names of dead men, claims that changed hands too conveniently. When I confronted him about it, he sent his men after me." "And you ran up here?" Eleanor understood now. "How did you know about this cabin?" "Everyone in Red Hollow knows about this cabin. It's where Farrow used to—" Daniel stopped, looking at Eleanor more carefully. "Wait, you're her, aren't you? The woman from Boston. Farrow's mail-order bride." Eleanor felt heat rise in her face. "That's not what I am anymore." "She killed 3 of Sloan's men," Cole said flatly. "I killed the 4th. So that business is settled." Daniel's eyes widened. "Holloway's crew? They came after you?" "They came after me. She just happened to be here." Cole moved back to the window. "How many men does Sloan have left?" "At least a dozen, maybe more." Daniel struggled to sit up, managed it this time. "But here's the thing. I didn't just run. I took the ledger. All the proof of what Sloan's been doing. Names, dates, claims, everything. Eleanor and Cole exchanged glances. Where is it? Eleanor asked. Hidden, about 2 miles south of here, in a hollow tree near the old mine entrance. Daniel looked between them. If we can get that ledger to the federal marshal in Carson City, Sloane's done. His whole operation falls apart. And if we don't? Cole asked. Then he keeps killing, keeps stealing, and eventually he finds me and finishes the job his men started. Daniel met Cole's eyes. And he finds you too, because once he realizes Holloway's dead, he's going to know someone in this cabin killed him. He won't let that stand. Cole was quiet for a long moment. So we have 2 choices, run or fight. There's a third choice, Eleanor said. We get the ledger and we destroy Sloane. End this for good. That's the fight option with extra steps, Cole pointed out. It's the smart fight option. Eleanor stood. We can't keep running. Even if we go to Canada or Oregon, what's to stop someone else like Sloane from coming after us? Or someone who recognizes you from that wanted poster? We'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Better than being dead. Is it? Eleanor crossed her arms. I didn't survive everything we've been through just to spend my life hiding. If there's a way to actually fix this, to make it so we can live without constantly watching for the next threat, I say we take it. Cole looked at her for a long time. Then he turned to Daniel. This ledger. What makes you so sure it'll be enough? 'Cause Sloane's been careful about keeping his hands clean. But the ledger has his signature on every page, his handwriting, his records. Daniel's voice strengthened. The federal marshal has been trying to build a case against him for months. This is what he needs. And how do you propose we get it to Carson City? That's 100 miles at least through territory Sloane controls. We don't go through his territory. We go around. North through the high country, then west. Daniel pointed vaguely. It'll take longer, but it keeps us off the main roads. In case you haven't noticed, you can barely stand, Cole said. You're not going anywhere for at least a week. Then you go, both of you. Get the ledger and… No. Cole's voice was flat. If this is a setup, if we leave you here and come back to find a dozen of Sloane's men waiting, we're dead. You stay where we can see you. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't have the strength. He slumped back against the wall. So what do we do? Cole looked at Eleanor. What do you think? The question surprised her. He was actually asking her opinion, treating her like an equal partner. I think we wait until Daniel can travel. Another week, maybe 2. Use that time to prepare. Then we get the ledger and we make for Carson City. And if Sloane's men show up before then we kill them. Eleanor said it simply, like she was discussing the weather. Same as we did with Holloway. Cole's mouth quirked, almost a smile. All right then. We prepare. The next week was a blur of activity. Cole took inventory of their ammunition. They had 14 bullets for the rifle, 6 for the pistol he'd taken off Holloway's body. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough if they were careful. He taught Eleanor to shoot the pistol, which kicked harder than the rifle, and bruised her palm until she learned to grip it properly. Daniel recovered faster than expected. By the 4th day, he was walking short distances. By the 7th, he was insisting he could travel. You're still weak, Eleanor said. She was checking his bandages, pleased to see the wounds were healing clean. Another few days won't hurt. Another few days gives Sloane time to find us. Daniel looked out the window at the melting snow. The trails are clearing. Once they're passable, he'll send men up here. You know he will. He wasn't wrong. Eleanor had been thinking the same thing. The temperature had risen steadily over the past week. The snow was melting fast, turning the clearing around the cabin into a muddy mess. Soon the trails would be navigable, and once they were, they'd be vulnerable. Then we leave tomorrow, Cole said. Get the ledger first. Then we decide our next move based on what we're dealing with. They packed light, food for 5 days, ammunition, medical supplies, blankets. Eleanor strapped the knife to her belt and the pistol to her thigh under her skirt. Cole carried the rifle and Holloway's gun. Daniel was unarmed, too weak to be trusted with a weapon, even if they'd had one to spare. They left at dawn. The forest was waking up from winter, dripping with meltwater. Birds called from the trees. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. Daniel led them south, moving slowly but steadily. He stopped frequently to check their position against landmarks only he could see. After 2 hours, they reached an area where the trees grew thick and the undergrowth was nearly impenetrable. There, Daniel pointed to a massive pine with a split trunk. The hollow is on the north side. Cole approached it carefully, rifle ready. He reached into the hollow and pulled out a leather satchel wrapped in oilcloth. When he opened it, a ledger bound in dark leather fell into his hands. Eleanor looked over his shoulder as he flipped through the pages. Columns of numbers, dates, names. James Farrow's name appeared multiple times. So did Holloway's. And at the bottom of each page, a signature. Garrett Sloan. "This is it," Cole said. "This is enough." A gunshot cracked through the forest. Bark exploded from the tree next to Eleanor's head. She dropped instinctively, her hand going to the pistol. Cole had already spun, the rifle coming up. "Run!" he shouted. They ran. Through the trees, over fallen logs, Daniel stumbling between Eleanor and Cole. More shots followed them, kicking up mud and snow. Eleanor counted at least 3 different shooters, maybe 4. They'd been followed, or worse, they'd walked into a trap. "This way!" Daniel veered left toward a rock outcropping. They scrambled up and over it, gaining precious seconds. Behind them, voices shouted, men crashing through the brush. Cole stopped at the top of the outcropping and turned. "Keep going. I'll slow them down." "Like hell," Eleanor said. She positioned herself beside him, the pistol in her hand. "Eleanor, we do this together or not at all?" He looked at her and something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance. Then he nodded and sighted down the rifle. The first man came around the outcropping and Cole dropped him with a single shot. The others scattered, taking cover behind trees. 4 of them, Cole said. "Maybe 5. "We have 12 bullets left," Eleanor said. "Then we make them count." Daniel had flattened himself against a rock, his face pale. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think they'd follow me this far." "Worry about that later," Cole said. "Right now, stay down." A head appeared around a tree trunk. Eleanor fired, missed. The pistol's recoil was worse than she remembered. Her hand was already aching. "Breathe before you shoot," Cole said calmly, like they were back at the cabin practicing. "Don't jerk the trigger." Another shooter moved between trees. Eleanor breathed, aimed, squeezed. The man went down. "Better," Cole said. They held the position for 10 minutes that felt like hours. The shooters tried twice to rush them, and both times were driven back. Eleanor's ears rang from the gunfire. Her hands shook, but she kept shooting. Then silence fell, long enough that Eleanor started to wonder if the men had retreated. "Barrett!" a voice called from the trees. "That you up there?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Keller. I work for Garrett Sloan." The voice was conversational, almost friendly. "He wants to talk to you. Make a deal." "I'm not much for talking." "He figured you'd say that. So here's the situation. You've got something that belongs to him, that ledger. We know you have it because we've been watching the kid for days, waiting to see where he hid it. You led us right to it." Eleanor felt sick. They'd been used, all of them. "Give us the ledger," Keller continued, "and we let you walk away. You, the woman, even the kid. Clean slate." "Somehow I doubt that," Cole said. "Sloan's a businessman. He doesn't care about you. He cares about his property. Give it back. This all goes away." Cole looked at Eleanor. She could see the question in his eyes. They could hand it over, walk away, live, or they could fight for something bigger than themselves. Eleanor shook her head. Cole turned back toward the trees. "Here's my counteroffer. You walk away right now and I don't kill the rest of you." Keller laughed. Bold words for a man with 4 bullets left. 6, actually, Cole said. "I've been counting yours too." Silence. Then, "Your funeral." The assault came fast and coordinated. 2 men from the front, 1 circling to the left. Cole dropped the first with a shot to the chest. Eleanor hit the second in the leg. Not a kill shot, but enough to put him down. The third man got within 10 feet before Cole's second shot caught him in the throat. Then the rifle was empty. Cole threw it aside and drew Holloway's pistol. A 4th man appeared from the right, but Daniel, who was supposed to be helpless, grabbed a rock and threw it with surprising accuracy. It caught the man in the temple and he dropped like a stone. "There's 1 left," Cole said. "Keller." They waited. Nothing moved in the forest. Then Eleanor saw him, a shadow slipping between trees, trying to flank them. She tracked his movement, her pistol steady. When he stepped into the open, she fired. The shot took him in the shoulder. He spun and went down, but he was still moving, still reaching for his gun. Cole finished it with a single shot. The forest went quiet except for the sound of their breathing and the drip of meltwater from the trees. "Is it over?" Daniel's voice shook. "For now." Cole reloaded both pistols with ammunition taken from the dead men. His hands were steady, mechanical. "But Sloan knows we have the ledger now. He'll send more men." "Then we can't go back to the cabin," Eleanor said. "No, we head for Carson City. Today." Cole looked at Daniel. "Can you make it?" "I don't have a choice, do I?" "None of us do." Cole tucked the ledger into his coat. "We move fast, we stay off the main trails, and we don't stop until we're in federal territory." "Understood?" Eleanor and Daniel both nodded. They left the dead where they fell and started walking. The journey took 4 days. They moved through terrain that was barely passable, staying high in the mountains where Sloan's men were less likely to search. They slept in shifts, ate sparingly, and spoke only when necessary. Daniel's wounds reopened on the second day, and Eleanor stitched them again by firelight, her hands steadier than they should have been. On the third day, they saw riders in the valley below, 6 men moving in formation, searching. They waited until nightfall to move, navigating by starlight and instinct. On the 4th day, they saw Carson City in the distance. They reached the federal marshal's office just after dawn. The marshal was a gray-haired man named Hutchins, who looked at them like they'd crawled out of a grave, which, in a way, they had. Cole handed him the ledger without a word. Hutchins opened it, flipped through the pages, and his expression went from skeptical to grim. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" Cole asked. "It matters if I'm going to use it. I need to know this isn't fabricated." "It's real," Daniel said. He stepped forward. "I'm Daniel Reeves. I worked for Sloan." That's his handwriting, his signature. Every entry is documented, cross-referenced with county records. It's all there. Hutchins looked at Daniel for a long moment, then at Cole, then at Eleanor, who probably looked as exhausted and filthy as she felt. "All right," he said finally. "I'll verify this. If it checks out, and I think it will, I'll have warrants issued within the week. Sloan and everyone who works for him." "That includes a lot of people," Daniel said. "Half of Red Hollow is on his payroll. Then half of Red Hollow is going to jail." Hutchins closed the ledger. "You 3 can stay in town until this is settled. I'll need you to testify." "How long?" Cole asked. "Month, maybe 2. Sloan's got lawyers. This'll be a fight." Cole looked at Eleanor. She knew what he was thinking. 2 months in Carson City meant 2 months of exposure, 2 months of risk. Someone might recognize him from the wanted posters. Someone might decide the reward was worth more than doing the right thing. But running meant this never ended, meant looking over their shoulders forever. "We'll stay," Eleanor said. Cole nodded slowly. "We'll stay." Hutchins arranged rooms for them in a boarding house at federal expense. Clean beds, hot water, real food. Eleanor slept for 16 hours straight and woke up feeling more human than she had in months. She found Cole outside, sitting on the porch and watching the street. He looked different in civilization, out of place, like a wild animal in a cage. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Not used to quiet." He shifted to make room for her on the step. "Too many people. Too much noise." Eleanor sat. The street was busy with morning traffic, wagons, horses, people going about their daily business. It felt alien after months in the mountains. "What happens after?" she asked. "After the trial?" Cole was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I've been thinking about that." "And?" "And I keep coming back to the same question. What do you want?" Eleanor considered it. "I want to stop running. I want a place that's mine. I want—" She stopped, unsure how to say the rest. "What?" "I want you there." She said it quietly. "Whatever we build, wherever we go, I want you there." Cole turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. "You understand what that means? I'm still wanted. Even if Sloan goes down, even if we testify, there's still that poster with my name on it, still that reward. I know. You could do better. could find someone respectable, someone with a future. I don't want respectable. Eleanor met his eyes. I want real. And you're the most real thing I've ever known. Cole's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused, scarred from a lifetime of hard living. Eleanor's wasn't much better anymore. All right then, he said. We do this together. Partners? Partners. They sat there as the morning sun climbed higher, two survivors holding on to each other in a world that had tried its best to break them. The trial happened 6 weeks later. Garrett Sloan sat in the defendant's chair looking more angry than afraid, his expensive suit and pomaded hair at odds with the mountain of evidence Hutchins had built against him. Daniel testified first, walking the jury through the ledger page by page. Then Eleanor, describing what Farrow had done and how it connected to Sloan's operation. Then Cole, his testimony short and brutal. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sloan's face went purple with rage as the verdict was read. He started shouting about appeals, about corrupt marshals and fake evidence. The judge had him removed from the courtroom, still screaming threats. It's over, Daniel said outside the courthouse. He looked lighter somehow, younger. It's actually over. For you, maybe, Cole said. What are you going to do now? Head east. I've got family in St. Louis. Figure I can start over somewhere nobody knows me. Daniel looked at Eleanor. What about you two? Eleanor glanced at Cole. They'd talked about this, made plans late at night in their separate rooms at the boarding house. North, she said. We're going north. Find some land, build something permanent. Sounds good. Daniel held out his hand to Cole. Thank you for everything. You didn't have to help me. Cole shook his hand. Yeah, we did. Daniel nodded and walked away. Eleanor and Cole stood on the courthouse steps watching the town move around them. In Cole's pocket was a letter from Marshal Hutchins, official documentation that Cole had assisted in bringing down a major criminal operation, along with a recommendation that the old assault charges be dismissed in light of his cooperation. It wasn't a pardon, exactly, but it was close enough. You ready? Cole asked. Eleanor thought about everything she'd been through. The lies, the betrayal, the blood. The woman she'd been when she stepped off that stagecoach would have been horrified by the woman she'd become. But that woman wouldn't have survived. This woman would. I'm ready, she said. They walked away from the courthouse together, toward horses they'd bought with gold dust Cole had saved, toward the life they'd fought and bled and killed to have a chance at building. The mountains waited to the north. And for the first time since Eleanor had left Boston, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. They rode north for 3 days before Eleanor realized Cole was taking them back to the cabin. Not the direct route. He was too careful for that, but winding through valleys and over ridges she recognized from their desperate flight to Carson City. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she saw the broken fence through the trees and knew for certain. Why are we here? She asked. Cole dismounted and stood looking at the cabin. In the months since they'd left, nature had started reclaiming it. Vines grew up the walls. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but it was still standing. Because I need to know something, he said. Know what? If you can really do this, live the way we'd have to live. He turned to face her. Carson City was civilization. Clean beds, regular meals, people everywhere. This, he gestured at the cabin, at the wilderness surrounding it. This is what our life would actually be, at least for a while. Until we find land, build something permanent, and I need to know if you can handle it, really handle it. Eleanor dismounted and walked past him to the cabin door. She pushed it open. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Her blood-stained dress still hung on a peg. Cole's empty rifle stood in the corner. The cot where he'd nearly died twice sat against the wall. She'd been terrified in this cabin, had fought for her life here, had learned what she was really made of. I already know I can handle it, she said. I've been handling it for months. In winter. When we had no choice. Cole followed her inside. This is different. This is choosing it. Eleanor ran her hand along the table where she'd learned to clean a rifle, to sharpen a knife, to stitch wounds that should have killed. You think I'm going to change my mind? Decide I want to go back to Boston, find some factory job and a safe husband? I think you deserve better than this. Better than what? Then you? She turned to face him. You're the only person who's ever treated me like I was strong enough to survive my own life. Everyone else wanted to protect me or control me or use me. You just wanted me to be capable. Cole's jaw worked. You are capable. That's what scares me. Why? Because you don't need me anymore. You could make it on your own now. Find easier work, safer people. He looked away. And part of me keeps waiting for you to realize that. Eleanor crossed the small space between them and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. I don't want easy or safe. I want real. I want someone who knows exactly who I am, including the parts that aren't pretty, and chooses me anyway. Do you understand? Cole's hands came up to cover hers. I killed a lot of people, Eleanor. Before Pharaoh, before Holloway. I'm not a good man. I don't need you to be good. I need you to be honest. She held his gaze. Are you going to leave? When things get hard or complicated or dangerous, are you going to disappear? No. Then that's all I need to know. Eleanor stepped back. Now, are we staying here tonight, or are we going to stand around questioning whether we both mean what we've already decided? The corner of Cole's mouth lifted. We're staying. They spent the rest of the afternoon making the cabin livable again. Cole repaired the door while Eleanor swept out months of accumulated dirt and debris. They found their old supplies mostly intact. Mice had gotten into the cornmeal, but the dried beans were still good. Eleanor even found the rabbit pelts she'd tanned, stiff now, but salvageable. That night they built a fire and ate beans cooked with wild onions Cole had found near the creek. It was simple food, nothing like what they'd eaten in Carson City, but sitting there across from each other in the firelight felt more like home than any boarding house room. Tell me about this land you want to find, Eleanor said. Cole stared into the fire. Somewhere north of here, past the territories where the federal marshals don't reach and the wanted posters don't follow. There's valleys up there, good water, game. We could build a real house. Not like this cabin, something with multiple rooms, a proper roof. Maybe run some livestock. You know how to do that? Build a house? I can figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else. He looked at her. What about you? What do you want? Eleanor thought about it. For so long, what she'd wanted had been defined by what she was running from. But now, with the threat of Sloane gone, and Cole sitting across from her asking what she actually wanted, not what she needed, but wanted, the question felt almost overwhelming. I want books, she said finally. A shelf of them. And I want to plant things. A garden. Maybe apple trees. She smiled at the absurdity of it. And I want to learn to shoot better than you. Cole laughed. Actually laughed, a sound she'd heard maybe 3 times total. That last one might take a while. I've got time. They sat in comfortable silence for a bit. Then Cole said, There's something I need to tell you about the wanted poster. Eleanor's stomach tightened. All right. The assault charge. The reason I was wanted. It wasn't a claim dispute like the poster said. It was my father. Cole's voice was flat, emotionless. After I killed him with that shovel, I ran. But someone saw, put 2 and 2 together. That poster's been following me for 18 years. Did he deserve it? Your father? He beat my mother to death. Was about to start on my sister, so, yeah, he deserved it. Cole met her eyes. But that doesn't change what I did. Doesn't make me any less of a killer. Eleanor considered this. The man across from her had killed his own father at 12 years old. Had spent nearly 2 decades running from that single act of desperate violence. And yet he was the same man who'd taught her to survive, who'd trusted her with his life, who'd chosen to fight for something bigger than himself when it would have been easier to run. I killed people too, she said quietly. Shot them, stabbed them, and I'd do it again if I had to. Does that make me a monster? That was self-defense. So was yours. Eleanor leaned forward. Your father was going to kill you or your sister or both. You stopped him. Everything else, the running, the poster, the years of looking over your shoulder, that wasn't justice. That was just the world being cruel to a 12-year-old who did what he had to do. Cole's hands clenched. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy. Simple. She reached across and took his hand. You're not the same person you were at 12 or at 20 or even 3 months ago. Neither am I. We've both done things we can't undo, But we get to decide who we are from here on out. Cole's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. When did you get so sure about things? When I realized being unsure was just another way of being scared. And I'm done being scared. The next morning, they rode out early. Cole led them higher into the mountains, following paths that barely existed. They saw elk, a black bear fishing in a stream, eagles circling overhead. The world felt huge and empty and full of possibility. On the fifth day, they found it. A valley nestled between two ridges, with a creek running through the center and meadows that would be perfect for grazing. The trees here were mixed, pine and aspen, with a few hardy oaks. The soil looked dark and rich, and most importantly, there was no sign that anyone had ever been here before. "This is it," Cole said. "This is what I was looking for." Eleanor dismounted and walked into the meadow. The grass came up to her knees. She could picture it. A house here, facing south to catch the sun. A garden there, protected from the wind. Apple trees along the creek where the soil would stay moist. "How much land are we talking about?" she asked. "As much as we can work. Out here, there's no deeds or surveys. You claim what you can defend and improve." Cole walked the perimeter, his practiced eye already measuring distances. "I'd say 200 acres, maybe more if we're ambitious." "We're ambitious." They made camp that night in the meadow and started planning. Cole sketched a rough design for the house in the dirt with a stick. Eleanor mapped out where the garden would go, where they'd build a barn eventually, where the well should be. "This is going to take years," Cole said. "The house alone will be months of work. And that's if everything goes right. Then we'd better get started." They went back to the cabin to gather supplies and anything else worth salvaging. Eleanor packed the rabbit pelts, the medical kit, the few remaining bullets. Cole took apart the cot and salvaged the nails. They worked efficiently, like a team that had been together for years instead of months. On their last night in the cabin, Eleanor stood in the doorway looking out at the clearing where she'd first stumbled through a blizzard, half dead and completely lost. She'd come here chasing a lie and found something real instead. Not the life she'd imagined, something harder, bloodier, more honest. "Ready?" Cole asked behind her. Eleanor pulled the door shut. "Ready." They rode back to the valley and began building. Cole felled trees while Eleanor stripped branches and sorted lumber. They worked from dawn until dark, their hands blistering and healing and blistering again. At night, they slept in a tent made from canvas they'd bought in Carson City, too exhausted to do anything but collapse. The foundation took 3 weeks. The walls took 2 months. By the time they had a roof overhead and a door that actually closed, it was late summer, and they were both 15 pounds lighter and covered in scars from 100 small accidents. But it was theirs. The house was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was solid. Cole had built it to last, with joints that would hold through any weather. Eleanor had chinked the gaps with mud and moss, had built a proper hearth from river stones. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. "What do you think?" Cole asked, standing back to survey their work. Eleanor looked at the house, at the garden she'd already started planting, at the valley spreading out around them. "I think we did it. We're not done. Still need a barn, fencing for when we get livestock, a root cellar." "Cole," she turned to him. "We did it. We built something, from nothing, just the 2 of us." He looked at her, and for once his expression was easy to read. Pride, relief, something that looked like happiness. "Yeah," he said, "we did." That fall they met their first neighbors. A family named Morrison, husband, wife, 3 kids, had settled in a valley about 10 miles south. They'd been there for 2 years and were surprised to find anyone this far north. "Don't get many people willing to homestead up here," John Morrison said. He was a lean man with kind eyes and hands as calloused as Cole's. "Too remote, too hard." "We like remote," Eleanor said. Sarah Morrison, his wife, laughed. "I can respect that. We came here to get away from the chaos down south. Too many people, too much noise. Up here, you've got room to breathe." The Morrisons became friends, or as close to friends as people living 10 miles apart could be. They traded goods, helped with big projects, warned each other about bad weather coming. The kids taught Eleanor which berries were safe to eat and where to find the best fishing spots. Sarah showed her how to make soap from lye and tallow. It was a community, small, sparse, but real. Winter came hard that year. Eleanor and Cole weathered it together in their small house, eating food they'd hunted and preserved. burning wood they'd cut and stacked. There were nights when the wind howled so loud they couldn't hear each other speak, mornings when the snow was so deep they couldn't open the door. But they'd prepared, they'd planned, and they survived. In the spring, Cole built the barn. Eleanor expanded the garden. They bought 2 horses, 4 chickens, and a milk cow from a trader passing through. The house got an addition, a 3rd room that would someday be for children, though neither of them said that out loud yet. They were building a life. Slowly, painfully, one day at a time. It wasn't the life Eleanor had imagined when she'd answered James Farrow's letter. It was harder, more isolated, demanding in ways she'd never anticipated. But it was hers, truly hers, not given to her by a husband or an employer or anyone else who might take it away. She and Cole had fought for every inch of it. One evening in late summer, 2 years after they'd first arrived in the valley, Eleanor was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, her hand automatically going to the pistol she still wore at her hip. Old habits. But it was just John Morrison and his oldest son, riding up with something wrapped in canvas on their pack horse. "Evening, Eleanor," John called. "Cole around?" "In the barn. What's that you've got?" "Surprise? Well, sort of." John dismounted and started unwrapping the canvas. "We went down to Carson City last month for supplies. While we were there, we stopped by the federal office. Asked about Cole Barrett." Eleanor's heart jumped. "Why would you do that?" "Because Sarah and I, we're not stupid. We know Cole's got history, the way he moves, the way he watches everything. That's a man who's been running." John pulled the canvas away to reveal a wooden frame. Inside was a document with an official seal. "But we figured if he was homesteading up here, working honest, then maybe his history didn't matter so much anymore." Eleanor stepped closer and read the document. It was a full pardon, signed by the territorial governor and countersigned by Marshal Hutchins. All charges dismissed. Cole Barrett was legally clear. "How did you—" "Turns out that Sloan business made you two pretty famous. The federal marshals were happy to recommend the pardon. Said Cole had served the territory better than half the lawmen on the payroll." John smiled. "Thought he might like to know he doesn't have to look over his shoulder anymore." Eleanor's throat was tight. "Thank you. Thank you. You're good neighbors, good people. Figured you deserved a fresh start for real." John tipped his hat. "We'll let you give him the news. Come on, boy." They rode off, leaving Eleanor standing in the garden holding the pardon. She looked at it for a long moment, then walked to the barn. Cole was repairing a stall door, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat on his forehead. He looked up when she entered. "Everything all right?" Eleanor held out the pardon. "You're free." Cole took it, read it, and went very still. "How—" "John Morrison. He went to Carson City and talked to the marshals. They recommended you for a full pardon." Eleanor watched his face. "It's over, Cole, really over. You're not wanted anymore." Cole stared at the document like he couldn't quite believe it was real. His hands were shaking slightly. "I've been running from this for 18 years. I know. I don't know what to do now." Eleanor stepped close and took his hands. "You keep building. You keep living. You do all the things you thought you'd never get to do because you were too busy running." Cole pulled her into a hug, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying, silent, almost angry tears that he'd probably been holding back for nearly 2 decades. "It's okay," Eleanor said. "You're okay now." They stood there at the barn while the horses shifted in their stalls, and the afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the walls. When Cole finally pulled back, his eyes were red, but his expression was lighter than Eleanor had ever seen it. "Marry me," he said. Eleanor blinked. "What?" "Marry me. Properly. Not because you need to, not because there's no other option, because we choose this. Because I want to wake up every day for the rest of my life knowing you chose me." He cupped her face in his hands. "I don't have a ring. Don't have anything fancy to offer you. Just this valley, and this life, and everything we've built. But if that's enough—" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Yes, it's enough. It's more than enough." They were married a month later in the Morrisons' front room, with Sarah as witness and John officiating using a book he'd brought from back east. Eleanor wore a dress she'd made herself from fabric Sarah had helped her order from Carson City. Cole wore his best shirt and pants, his hair actually combed for once. It was simple, quick, nothing like the elaborate wedding Eleanor had once imagined as a girl in Boston. It was perfect. That winter, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Cole on a morning when fresh snow had turned the world white and clean. He stared at her for a long moment, then picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We're going to need a bigger house," he said. "We've got time." They spent the winter planning the expansion. In the spring, Cole started building. By summer, they had 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Eleanor nested, arranging and rearranging the spaces, preparing. Their daughter was born in October, with Sarah Morrison as a midwife, and Cole pacing outside like a caged animal. She came out screaming, healthy and furious at the world. Eleanor held her and felt something break open in her chest, love so fierce it was almost frightening. "What should we name her?" Cole asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor looked at her daughter, this perfect, angry, beautiful thing she and Cole had made. "Hope. We'll name her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope for a future that didn't involve running or hiding or fighting. Hope that the life they'd built would last. Hope that the hard things they'd survived had meaning." The years that followed weren't easy. The frontier was never easy. They dealt with harsh winters, failed crops, sickness, injuries. There were times when Eleanor wondered if they'd make it. Times when money was so tight they ate nothing but beans and cornmeal for weeks. Times when the isolation felt crushing. But they made it. Together. Hope grew into a wild, fearless child who could track deer at 6 and shoot a rifle at 8. Cole taught her everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. Eleanor taught her to read and write, using books they ordered from back east whenever they could spare the money. When Hope was 5, they had a son, then another daughter. The house kept expanding, the farm kept growing, they bought more land, more livestock, built connections with other families settling in the northern territories. Eleanor never went back to Boston, never felt the need to. That life, the factories, the narrow streets, the sense of being trapped, belonged to someone else. A different Eleanor. Someone who hadn't yet learned what she was capable of. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the kids were asleep and she and Cole sat by the fire, Eleanor thought about James Farrow and his letters, about how she'd come west chasing a promise that never existed, about how she'd been betrayed and stranded and left with nothing. If Farrow had been the man he'd claimed to be, Eleanor would have married him, would have helped him work his claim, kept his house, lived a quiet life. She probably would have been content enough, but she never would have been this, never would have discovered the strength she had, the capability, the sheer stubborn will to survive. She never would have become someone who could build a life from scratch, who could defend what was hers, who could stand as an equal partner to someone like Cole. In a twisted way, Farrow had given her exactly what he'd promised, a fresh start, a new life, just not the one either of them had planned. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked one night. He was cleaning his rifle, the same rifle he'd taught Eleanor to shoot with all those years ago. "About how I got here, all the things that had to go wrong for everything to go right." Cole looked up. "You regret any of it?" Eleanor thought about the fear, the blood, the violence, about the people she'd killed and the innocence she'd lost, about the long winter when she'd stitched Cole back together and didn't know if either of them would survive. "No," she said, "I don't regret any of it. Even Farrow, especially Farrow. If he'd been honest, I'd be someone else right now, someone smaller, someone who didn't know what she was really made of." Eleanor looked at Cole. "I like who I am now. Wouldn't trade it for anything." Cole set down the rifle and crossed to where she sat. He pulled her up and into his arms, and they stood there swaying slightly, like they were dancing to music only they could hear. "I love you," he said. Simple, direct, the way he said everything. "I love you too." Outside, the valley was settling into night. Their children slept in rooms they'd built with their own hands. The livestock were safe in the barn. The garden Eleanor had planted was waiting for spring. Everything they had, everything they were, had been earned through blood and sweat and refusal to quit. It wasn't the life Eleanor had imagined. It was better. Because it was real. Because it was hers. Because she'd chosen it, fought for it, and built it with someone who saw her not as she should be, but as she actually was. And that made all the difference. Years later, when Hope was grown with children of her own, she asked her mother about the scar on her hand, the one Eleanor had gotten when she'd first learned to skin a rabbit. "How did you get that?" Hope asked.
Eleanor looked at the faded white line across her palm. "That's from learning something important."
"What?" "That the things worth having are the things you have to fight for. That easy and safe aren't the same as good. And that sometimes the worst things that happen to you lead to the best things in your life, if you're brave enough to see them through." Hope nodded like she understood, though Eleanor knew she couldn't. Not really. Not yet. Understanding came from living, from facing your own trials and discovering what you were made of. But someday, Hope would understand. Someday, all of Eleanor's children would face their own challenges and have to decide who they wanted to be. And when that time came, Eleanor hoped they'd remember what she and Cole had built from nothing. Hoped they'd remember that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. That night, Eleanor stood on the porch of the house she'd built and looked out at the valley. The same valley where she and Cole had first decided to stop running and start building, where they'd chosen each other over and over every single day. Cole came out to join her, his hair gray now, but his eyes still that same startling blue. "Cold out here." "I know." But Eleanor didn't move. "I was just thinking." "About?" "About that girl who stepped off the stagecoach in Red Hollow with 73 cents and no plan. About how terrified she was." Cole put his arm around her shoulders. "You want to tell her anything? If you could go back?" Eleanor considered it. "I'd tell her it's going to be harder than she can possibly imagine. That she's going to do things she never thought herself capable of. That she's going to be scared and lost and absolutely certain she's going to die." "That's bleak." "I'm not finished." Eleanor leaned into him. "I'd also tell her that she's stronger than she knows. That the life waiting for her is nothing like what she expects and exactly what she needs. That 2,000 miles from now, she's going to find a man bleeding out in a cabin, and that saving him will be the best decision she ever makes." Cole's arm tightened around her. "You really think that? After everything?" "I know it." Eleanor turned to look at him. "I came here chasing a promise that didn't exist, and I found something better. I found me. The real me. The one who doesn't need saving because she learned to save herself." They stood there as the stars came out, two people who'd survived everything the world had thrown at them and built something that would outlast them both. Not because it was easy, because it mattered, and in the end, that was the only lesson worth learning, the only truth worth knowing. That you didn't find yourself in the safe places or the comfortable places. You found yourself in the places that tested you, that demanded everything you had and then asked for more. Eleanor had been tested, had been broken down and rebuilt stronger, and she'd emerged on the other side not as the person she'd thought she should be, but as the person she actually was. That was worth more than gold, more than safety, more than every promise James Farrow could have made and kept. It was worth everything.